Let me see if I can share my screen this morning. We're at that portion of the early part of the second part of the book of Isaiah. The first 11 verses, remember, God instructed 3 voices to speak comfort to his people. And it was interesting to see what voices God used. One of them was his arm, and his arm will later on be described as the suffering servant. And so there is much in this second part of the book that is intended to help us deal with the difficult world we live in. It will present to us not only the anointed one who will return Israel back to the land, but it also will present the one who atones for our sin. And that one who atones for our sin is the one who's relevant to us and to people, to Christians in every age. And so as we watch this part of the book unfold, we're going to see a suffering servant that is the heart of the gospel. And so we decided last week that these verses 12 through 31, this is still in the first chapter of this second part of the book, verses 12 through 31, they are offered as a counter to a position adopted in verse 27. Verse 27, it pictures Jacob and Israel. Of course, that is the Israelites as they are in captivity, and their complaint, if I can use that word, is that their way is hidden from the Lord and that their right is disregarded by God. So we might paraphrase that. First of all, that God is unfair. My way is hidden from the Lord. And then secondly, God no longer remembers me and no longer cares about me. And that's the thought that we've been working with all along as we look back across the desert and watch that column of smoke rising from Jerusalem. So we decided it's in 2 parts, this case that's stated, verses 12 through 20, which we looked at last week, and then verses 21 through 26. And we're going to pick up in verse 21 this morning. Each of those 2 parts has 4 stanzas. First stanza dealing with Creator God and lessons of creation. Second stanza dealing with a God who is self-sufficient in wisdom and supreme in power. They have a section that deals with the unique dignity and authority of God. And then the last stanza of each of these sections deals with the fact that God is an incomparable God. Remember last week that God was compared with the idol and the idolaters, and that the idol just has no prayer of standing up when compared with God. So that's where we're at. We're going to pick up in verse 21. And so we should expect to see something about a creator and revelation. And let me see if I can get down to verse 21 fairly quickly here. So verse 21, do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? So these questions begin the second stanza. In verse 12, the questions established that there is only one creator God. That was in the first answer here. The questions here point to the fact that there are lessons to be learned from the created world. Know and hear and told and understood are arranged in a chiasm, and that's that classical arrangement that George talks about, and I've talked about it from time to time. It's an arrangement that essentially focuses on what's at the center of the chiasm. And here, the hearing and the telling are what's at the heart of this chiasm. And of course, what's being heard is what God has said from the beginning through creation. And the only way that hearing can take place is by revelation. The fact that God has told us through creation. And so hearing the truth is dependent on being told the truth. Isaiah is appealing to revelation from God. Isaiah is saying, and he's not in the least bit apologetic about saying, you should look around in your world and you will see evidence of God. I think Paul made that same case in Romans chapter 1. We are without excuse. Everyone is without excuse. We say that, and then we fail to understand the world around us. We look and we don't see the things that we should see. That's because of our fallenness. And so part of what we want to do when we look at God's word is let that revelation come through to us. Let God's word help us understand what he wants us to know. And so, Israel has understood these things from the foundations of the earth. That's what this says. And that puts them in a gives them a unique kind of responsibility. And if you're familiar with the Pentateuch, that's the responsibility that God wanted them to have. He wanted them to be a nation of priests to the world, to share this truth. And so there's nothing especially new here, but it's being said in a way that hopefully gets our attention. So there is a unique relationship between Israel and her God, and there is no idol that can do that. What kind of relationship can you have with it, with that wooden or stone or cast silver or gold figurine that you've had made? How can you have a relationship with that? So verse 22, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. It is he who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. He, who is he? Do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? Well, there has to be some telling. And so it's the one who's doing the telling that is being talked about. It's he who sits above the circle of the earth. And I don't want to take that language too far, but I do want us to consider that what's being said there is that God sits above and outside of creation. God has created creation, and he is not limited by it. He does not dwell exclusively within creation.
He's not a part of the creation.
Exactly. He is separate from it and has his being not only within creation, but outside of creation as well. And so he is both immanent here with us and transcendent above and outside of the creation that we experience. That sounds theological, doesn't it? So the one who knew the right way to create the earth also presides over its history with the same wisdom and understanding. When I used to deal with youth groups, young men always seemed to get interested in cars. And I always used to tell the youth group, when the manual for your Ford tells you what kind of oil to use, do you pay attention to it? Does it matter that it says use 10W30? Do you go out and buy just whatever oil you lay your hand on, or do you look for 10W30? You look for the 10W30 because the one who made the car knows what's best for the car. In the same way, you and I were made by our Creator And his word tells us what's best for us. And so should we pay attention to that? It is, it seems self-evident when you think about it. But I spent a long time not paying the least bit of attention to what God had done in my life. So the one who sits and stretches and spreads is the response to the previous verse. The creatures are like grasshoppers when they are compared to the Creator. We're not like grasshoppers as we're compared to grasshoppers. We're like grasshoppers as we stand before God. Our significance is small. This is one of Deke's moments here, and I'm sad he's not with us this morning to experience it. Deke always says that the universe is so big, how can we hope to know it? How can we hope to know the God who created it? How can we experience him? He is so large. And so we must, in humility, recognize who we are in comparison to him. And it's a grand thought, and it's a very true and marvelous thought. It helps us to walk in humility. And that's one of the three big things, isn't it? Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. So the greatness of God is also seen in the fact that he requires the universe as his tent. This is the one who has revealed himself. When we talk about God and his uniqueness, he has stretched out a universe that we still haven't seen the edges of it. We can't reach the ends of the universe. And so for the God who has stretched that out above us and above himself in some sense, how can we hope to know him? But it also gives us a perspective on his the majesty and his glory, the wonder of who he is. If you can imagine one who can do that, do you ascribe worth to him? Do you ascribe dignity and value and glory to one who stretches out a universe that, with all of our knowledge, with all of our understanding, and with all of the grand technology that that God has allowed us to have over these years, we still can't reach the edges of the tent. And so how can we compare ourselves with the God who created that? It is very humbling to consider what God has done. And you'll bear with me for just a second. We look out at the universe and we can't reach the edges of that, but we can also look within. And when we study microscopic things, when we study quantum things and particles and wave theory and all of those things that Einstein and others have been engaged in to help us understand how energy works, and how we still can't convert matter to energy. We don't understand how that happens. You know, we see what makes it happen, and we can replicate it, but we don't understand it still. And gosh, we can't see within, and we can't see without, and God created it all. The miracle of sight always fascinates me. Mike has on a green shirt this morning, and every one of you knows what color Mike's shirt is, and we all share that perception. And the light that bounces off Mike's shirt and impacts our eyes, and then the nerves within our eyes, and then our brain processes all of that. And we take that happens all day, every day, and we take it for granted. My heart beats all day, every day, and I never give it a thought. what a magnificent God to keep all of this, to juggle all of this, if I can use a word from yesterday.
And mankind seeks to try to understand all, ever seeking. They'll take if you got billions of dollars, you can go up 5,000 feet, whatever, 5,000 miles, right?
Yeah.
Ever seeking, Tower of Babel,
Yeah.
ever seeking.
Yeah.
So it's not as if it's not built in us to understand that we can't reach the end of it. We just think we can.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is a majestic God that Isaiah is picturing here. And then it goes on in verse 23, this is the God who brings princes to nothing. It makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. And that's that tohu word from the creation account, as emptiness. The Holy One of Israel rules over all that seem to have weight and substance of their own. All of the rulers of the earth, when I meet people of substance, I'm very conscious of that I'm talking to someone of substance. And I want not to reveal myself. I want not to reveal my lack of substance. And yet, when I come into the presence of God, I struggle with ascribing to him more worth, more weight, more substance than the people around me. And yet he has more, he has far more. And so I must work at understanding the glory of God. I must work at understanding the worth, the weight, the substance of God. The one who created them, that is the princes and the rulers of the earth, the one who created them is able to make them as though they are not. That's the emptiness, as though they are not. I try to remember, it's one of the things that I really do try to hang on to, is that the heart of the king is able to be turned by God just as easily as he can turn the path of the river. And that's a reason to expect miracles to happen. It's a reason to expect God's presence to reveal itself in the world. And sometimes we see it. There are miraculous things that we shared in the room this morning about seeing Norman Rockwell's life story in a play recently, and as you watched that life unfold, it was hard not to know that there was a God behind it and undergirding it and leading Rockwell, if you will. And the impact that he had on our nation was stunning. He was certainly a man of substance, a man of weight, a person of worth. And when I watched his life unfold before me in just 3 or 4 hours yesterday, I watched God at work, I think, not only in a man's life, but in a nation. And it was stunning, breathtaking. So God is able to accomplish what he will in the world. Remember, this is all part of trying to help Israel achieve comfort, to be comforted, and to know that their God is this big and has this much influence and power over what takes place in the world. Is that not comforting? That's how I must live this side of Jesus coming back. I know about the cross. I know what the cross is there for. I've appropriated that cross for my salvation, and yet I must wait for my King. And this is how I must live in the world as I wait. I need to know that God is in control. I need to know that God is working out his purposes. I need that to provide comfort as I walk through these days of a harsh and unfriendly world. So comfort ye my people. So Isaiah goes on and he says, scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows on them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. Well, who is the they? The they is the rulers, princes of the earth that were in the verse prior to this. Most of the guys I think that hear me this morning are old enough to remember Nikita Khrushchev standing at the podium in the United Nations, banging his heel on the podium and claiming that the USSR would bury America. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows on them and they wither and the tempest carries them off like stubble. We're watching things unfold in Cuba that could never unfold under Fidel Castro, but Castro's gone. We're watching things in China that are very different from the People's Revolution that took place at the beginning of my lifetime. Princes of the earth, they come and they go. And God governs their coming and their going. And he blows on them and they wither and they're gone. And so that's a bit humbling as we think about it. It's a bit stunning how big God is. And it's about understanding how limited our perspective is, how grand God's plan is, how full and detailed and thoughtful and amazing God's plan is.
It's a victorious plan.
Yeah, a victorious plan.
David versus Goliath.
Yeah. So God plants them, he sows them, their stem takes root, he blows on them, and they're gone. They come and go at the will of the one who creates them. That's the perspective that we ought to try to maintain. It is he who oversees their lives. It is he who judges them. They wither and the tempest carries them off like stubble. Stubble is always in the Old Testament a picture of winnowing, and it's the chaff, stubble that's blown away. And so it is the Creator who judges them. That there is a judge is one of those things that we have to come to terms with if we're going to come to salvation. We have to know that there is objective truth, there is right and wrong, there is real righteousness, and we have to know that there is a judge who will judge us by that standard. We have to come to believe in that judge and trust his provision for us if we're going to come to salvation. So this one who judges, we better pay attention. This is a moment of truth for Israel and for us. And then verse 25, to whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One. This is the Holy One of Israel speaking. Finally, it's revealed who's speaking. And he says, okay, now that you know who I am and what I've done, who exactly is it that you're going to compare me to? Who is it that's going to give me advice? Who is it that was there when I did all this? Who is it that I should emulate him? Who's the one I should try to partner up with? And it's quite clear that there's no answer to that. So we know who's speaking, along with his power, his wisdom, his dignity, his sovereignty, and his authority, which make him beyond compare. There comes his holiness. is absolute moral purity. And over the years, absolute moral purity has become, I guess, more and more stunning as I realize my lack of moral purity, as I come to terms with who I am as an individual. The moral purity of God and the idea that I'm one day going to be like him and going to be able to stand in his presence. That's a promise that I long to see fulfilled.
Yeah, I'm thinking some of these things like power and maybe sovereignty, these are all temporary, and authority can be in the world by false leaders or by leaders who take over whatever we mean. But so they may have some of those things, but they don't have the holiness.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
And the extent.
Yeah, and the extent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's it. And theirs is temporary, but they don't have the absolute moral purity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fallen world, and every leader that we elect or raise up is part of that fallen world. And what a breathtaking picture is created of the Creator and his creation.
You know, I had a great experience this morning. I come from the bottom of Beach Mountain, and so I have to ride past. So I go down into this where the route that goes to Newland, and then the route that comes across the light. So at that little fork, it was dark and cold down there.
Yeah.
And you know, I came up that little hill just before I got to Leeds McRae, and the sun came in my window, and I had instant light and instant warmth. And I thought to myself, I'm heading for God. I mean, that's where I'm going. I'm going to Bible. I took the right path. I didn't go to Newland and stay in the darkness. And it was just a wonderful brief little thought that came to my mind.
What a magnificent moment.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
It was cool.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
He is there in creation.
Yeah, he was there, right there.
It's beautiful.
It's a
So
reminder to keep our eyes open.
That's right. You got to look.
Yes.
Just be
Spiritual.
stay in. Tune in.
and so Isaiah says, lift up your eyes on high and see
There you go.
who created these. He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing. Lift up your eyes on high and see is a call to look at the host of stars in the sky. Stars have been given many names as time goes by, but their real names are given by their creator. Someday you and I will know them by those names. They are many, but each of them is known to the creator by its own name. The creation verb, who created these, the Hebrew verb bara is used here, and it is the creation verb, and it is a magnificent sort of picture when that verb is used. It's the picture that that pictures creating something new out of nothing. You don't start with raw materials. You just speak something into existence, something new into existence. There's only one who has that ability. And
That made me think just now, we might be builders, but we have the material
yeah,
given to us, right?
yeah,
But we're not creators.
yeah. Those pardon me, and I know we're all people of science because we're 20th and 21st century people, but pardon me, scientists, you're talking about creating life in a test tube, but you're using materials that are already in existence. You're not creating life. You might be putting together something that
Questionable.
that's already been done. So each star is given its own name. It's the very real power of the creator that sustains each star. I suspect there are stars out there at such a distance from us that we have yet to see them. Their light has not yet reached us. How big a tent is this, by the way? So
Mm,
Real deity is to be found not in a man-made item, but in the one who created the heavens.
that's great.
If Creator God knows every star by name, and this is the thought for Israel and the thought for me as I live between the cross and the second coming. If this Creator God knows every star by name, how can I think that he would forget me?
Oh,
How can I think that he is going to fail after having created me and wanting me, longing for me, and I'm in the midst of a story of him wanting to redeem me? In the midst of all of that, how can I think that he would forget me or his people? I look at my church, my little country church, my little place where I gather together with some wonderful people and sing songs and hear the gospel preached, and it's a big part of my life. And I realize that people have been doing this for many thousands of years, worshiping God. And this, what I call the church, my little church, we're just part of the church, the big C church, the Catholic Church, if you will. We're part of a universal church, and God has kept this church in existence. That word remnant comes to mind, and will keep it in existence until he comes back. And when I'm like him and standing in his presence, I will look around and I will see my brothers and sisters who are like him and standing in his presence. And it will be all of us who have been a part of his church. Is this a glorious God who has redeemed us into that position for eternity? How can I think that he will forget?
mm,
How can I think that he has forgotten me in my minuscule, tiny little experience here in the midst of all of it? Can I indeed, in fact, trust him in the midst of all of the things that I think are trouble, in the midst of all of the things that come my way, in the midst of the thing that's going to end my life on planet Earth? Something's going to end my life here, whether it's a disease, whether it's an intruder in my home, whether it's a mob scene somewhere, whether it's just the failing of a heart that has grown, that has beat too many times. No matter what brings me to my end, even in the midst of that, I can trust him, because my end is only the end here. When I end here, I expect to cross a threshold into a new existence that is better than anything I've known so far. Can I trust him? My Christian faith looks past the struggles of this world and looks forward to the promises that are very real promises. I'm going to be with brothers and sisters. I'm going to have the chance to talk with Moses, to talk with Paul, to talk with
oh, death, where is thy sting?
oh, death, where is
That's
thy
yet to
sting?
come.
So not only does the glory of God, the Creator, validate the promises of verses 1 through 11, it's also the cure for the despondent heart, which wonders, how can God do this to me? Or which wonders, does he no longer remember me or care? The promise is stated in verse 27. The answer from theology is given in verses 28 and 29. And the answer from experience is given in verses 30 and 31. I'm going to do this fairly quickly, guys, but I think you'll see it quite clearly here. Verse 27 states the problem. God speaks to Jacob and Israel and says, why do you keep saying, remember, it's a keep saying thing. Why is it always on your lips that your way is hidden from the Lord and that your right is disregarded by my God? That's the thing. So my way is hidden from the Lord is a theological complaint. God, can't you see what's going on in my life? And my right is disregarded by my God is an experiential question. And it's the question that says, why are my prayers not answered? Why do I feel distant from God? Why is my experience not that rich, full hand-holding experience that I want with God? So the questions are theological and experiential, and so we're going to get two answers, a theological one and an experiential answer. Have you not known, have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not grow faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. So their God is eternal. He's creator. He's untiring. How can they possibly fathom his ways? His ways belong to eternity, and they, the Israelites, belong to time. His ways, God's ways, belong to eternity. My ways belong to time. His vision is for the world. My vision is always local. My perspective is limited. His unceasing energy keeps him ahead of the place they have reached. His plan goes beyond my experience. His plan is already out there, and I'm just seeing it and feeling it beginning to unfold. He is already ahead of where I am, and I must remember how good he is, that his plan is for me, that his plan is in order that he might bless me, and his plan is to grow me and to redeem me. And so in the midst of all that comes, in the midst of the chiseling on me that must take place, in the midst of the fallen world in which I live, in the midst of all of the struggles that all of that creates, in the midst of all of it, God is working on my behalf to get me to the place where I can stand face to face with him and be morally pure like him. If you want a fun thing to do when we finish this morning, go ahead and read Romans chapter 8 this morning. All things. So verse 29, he gives power to the faint. To him who has no might, he increases strength. The faint are those who fail under life's pressures. Him who has no might describes the lack of innate strength. We like to think we're strong, but we come up against things that are immovable objects from our perspective. I'm in the midst of moving, so I'm remembering all of the things that cause me to grow faint. Strength is related to the word for bone, and it shares the ideas of durability and stability. It's it's a picture of something that is really hard, really strong, really a solid foundation for something. And so the one who has no might, God increases his strength. That foundation is strengthened. So even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. These last two verses give the experiential answer to the disputation. Natural resources are going to fail, but a different experience is possible. And you might even reword this, though even youths shall faint and be weary, they who wait upon the Lord. Youths here is a word that brings to mind young men in peak condition, perhaps those that are ready for the Olympics. Even they reach exhaustion.
Simone Biles.
Even they have come to the end of themselves. And that's our experience as human beings. That's our experience as finite beings. That's our experience. In the end, our strength fails. That's the case for each of us, for all of us. But something else is being promised here. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. This isn't for everyone. This is for they who wait upon the Lord. There is this, these two verses have to be taken together. All of us in this world will experience weariness and a lack of strength and falling to exhaustion. But those of us who wait for the Lord can experience a new strength, a new kind of strength, a supernatural strength, if you will. Our foundation, our bone, our substance can be renewed and strengthened to go beyond what we experience here. That speaks about things that happen in our world, but it speaks about us moving on to a new world too. This is a picture of why, of ultimately why we should be comforted. If I wait upon the Lord, if I trust in him and wait upon what he's going to do in my life, if I endure as I live here in this world and wait for him, I will experience renewal. I will experience the strength of youth and more strength of youth than I've ever experienced before. We all have memories of our youthful strength, of our youthful vigor. We all have memories of how good it was to be young and strong. How wonderful it was. We didn't know it at the time, but we remember it now.
We took it for granted. I saw a guy running up Sugar Mountain this morning as I was driving down. I thought, yeah, I remember those.
Yeah. Yeah. So wait includes patience, resting, trusting. When these characteristic attitudes toward the Lord are constant, our faith is said to be unwavering. When our faith is unwavering, we're promised renewed strength, fresh strength, supernatural strength, divine strength, unwearying, unfainting. It's really quite amazing what kind of strength we're promised. And let's see if I can move this out of the way. There we go. The person of faith. Yeah, George says he's headed to Newland to speak to the sheriff on Daryl's behalf. Thanks for our prayers for him. So the person of faith, unlike the youths of the previous verse, finds inner resources that do not fail in the midst of life's pressures in a fallen world. I want to share with you guys a picture that always comes to my mind when I read that verse. My wife and I spent most of the last part of our lives in New Orleans at the seminary. We took 4 years out of that and moved to North Carolina to live with Chris's mom. It was clear at some point that she was in the early stages of dementia. And so we came and we spent 4 years with her. And during those 4 years, we watched her dementia / Alzheimer's progress. And we ultimately did have to place her in care because we were unable to provide what she needed. You can't not sleep at all. And so in those 4 years, the last 2 years, Mom was in a terrible way. We installed locks on our bedroom so that Mom couldn't get into our bedroom. She regularly attacked me with a fireplace poker. She was the sweetest person I have ever known. I used to tell my wife, you cannot vie for sweetest person in the world until your mother's gone. There is no sweeter person in the world. And I still think that. And yet she would attack me with a fireplace poker to do me in, not not to do harm, to end me.
Mm.
Many experiences. The reason I'm telling you this story is that in those last 2 years, when we were with mom and mom was still living in the house with us, I don't think Chris ever had more than 3 hours of uninterrupted sleep, ever. Not once in that whole 2-year period. I don't think she ever experienced more than a 3-hour period of uninterrupted sleep. I think I would have died of that. I don't think I could function. I don't think I could do that. Chris did that. And in the midst of that, she provided care for her mom 24 hours a day, but she was also teaching piano students. And she had at one point 73 piano students per week that she dealt with and took mom with her. And she did the shopping for our household and took mom with her. And she did, and Chris's sister was beside herself because of the condition of their mother. And so Chris ministered to her sister in the midst of that. And Chris took care of me and dealt with me in the midst of that. I did my best to be a helper, but I wasn't always a helper. In the midst of all of that, Chris never failed to have the strength that she needed to deal with each one of us in all of those circumstances. I remember walking into church, and our pastor was a young fella. He was a wonderful guy. He was aware of what was going on with mom. Chris was also leading the music in our church at the time. We walked into church one morning and the pastor said to Chris, "How's your mom doing?" And Chris said, "My mom has been gone for several weeks now." And she had. Mom was no longer with us. We hadn't seen mom at all. Chris said, "I'm just caring for what's left behind." And that went on for another couple of months. And Chris never once failed to provide for all of us in that circumstance. The only explanation I have for Chris's ability to deal with all that is these verses. God had to have strengthened her for that, for those tests. She was, it was unbelievable. It really was just stunning. Wow. I have never seen anything like it. My perspective is limited, but I have never seen anything like it. That's the promise that we have, guys. Our strength, not only here, but our strength as we go forward into eternity is renewed. And it is the God who's big enough to stretch out the universe as his tent. It is the God who is able to speak things into existence. It is this big God that is never going to forget, never going to fail, never going to abandon, never going to cause hurt, real hurt, to any of his creations, his masterpieces. That's what we are. God's in the business of shaping us into the masterpiece that he wants each one of us to be, so that he can have us for eternity. And we can look at each other and look at him and know the glory of God. And so Isaiah speaks to a people who have gone into captivity and reminds them who their God is, so that they might not grow faint, so that they might renew their strength, so that they might be encouraged that even though they have sinned and caused the circumstances that they're now living in, their God's big enough to redeem them. Their God has a plan that goes beyond this moment, their failure. What a word for us, for our circumstances.
Why art thou cast down, O my soul? Why art thou disquieted? Whatever thy hand finds to do heartily
Yeah,
unto the Lord.
yeah.
It brings impact and punch in those scriptures there. This had, it's all collected together.
Yeah. Our God is majestic and,
Yeah.
and glorious and of more weight and substance than we can humanly ascribe to him. So how do we lift up our voices, lift up our eyes from this and see the world around us? And how do we take what we learned while we were in Isaiah's world, and how do we look at this world and see it differently? Surely we must be encouraged to deal with the circumstances that we're living in. What stood out to you this morning? What kind of thoughts do we take away?
Oh, I mean, so yeah, you know, I mean, I knew God was big, but I hadn't really thought about it. And he's this big. It's unanswerable or unfathomable, or just, it's just incredible. And so that's what gives me even more hope. I think that's what it amounts to for
What a
me.
great thought.
Yeah. That I'm on the right path. But I have to stay there. So I have to ask God to help me, you know, listen to the Holy Spirit and stay tuned and tune into it.
Yeah. And as big as he is in your mind right now, Ted, he's also the God who is comes in through your windshield.
Yeah,
very personal.
He's everywhere. He is everywhere if you look for him.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, my wife. This is wonderful because my wife meets me at Banner Elk at the cafe for breakfast, and my wife is not a believer. It's killing me. It's killing me. Okay, and so, but she says to me now. She says, "What did you talk about this morning?" So there's still hope for me. Hope for me to help her.
Yeah.
To just tell her that about God.
Yeah.
And I also know that my time, she was a great wife. I forget how many, 60 years or something. So 1964 we were married. How many years that is? So we were 21. So she was a great mother and things, and she was in a Sunday school, you know, ran it in the church, but she didn't. I don't know why she didn't get it. And now I see that if you ask her about something, she just says, "Oh, well, I don't even know." I see some early signs of things. And I know that sooner or later it's going to be too late if it doesn't get to her. So that's kind of my project or whatever, my hope for her.
Yeah.
And I know that I've never really heard about people who have this situation, and if somebody dies and it hasn't happened, what those people do, or how they're affected. I've never heard a discussion about that. But that's what all this means. That's kind of what a lot of this means to me.
Yeah. That's that discussion that you've never heard, Ted, is as a former pastor. That engenders an awful lot of questions when that person goes.
Yeah.
And those are questions that the pastor can't answer.
Yeah.
And so those are questions that you have to take to God. You have to.
I mean, George knows it, but George says he's praying for her, and I told him 2 years ago, but when we already know, he knows about that, and he's told me to just keep.
I will be praying for her as well.
Doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons for marriage is that we can discover together inside the marriage, that you can discover together some of the truth about what God is as he is in unity in three parts. We experience oneness, one flesh. We experience oneness within marriage. And as part of the value of a marriage is to help us watch as the marriage unfolds, as time goes by and we're more conscious of what has taken place within the marriage, we can begin to see that we have become one in some sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And that we are, and that describes for us who God is in some sense. One purpose, one goal, one set of aspirations, one of us sets a goal for dinner, the other participates somehow in the production of it. There's all sorts of ways in which what we are inside the marriage reflects who God is. And it's a very personal way to picture God. But then you have to translate that experience out.
Out, yes.
And it's that's the hard part, I think. But it happens, Ted. It happens all the time. God routinely does that. And people pray about it. One of the most stunning things I ever saw, the first Sunday school class I was in after I became a believer, that I wasn't there very long, and a lady started coming to class. And after she was there for a period of time and we got familiar with her, she began to share that that her husband wasn't saved and didn't want any part of the church, didn't want anything to do with it, had experience with the church in the past, and was not only not interested, he was adamantly not ever going to participate in that. And so her heart was broken and she was asking for prayer about him. I remember standing at the front of the church to receive people who were making decisions. I remember standing up there and watching him come out of the back aisle of the church. This was a big, strong, he was a lineman by trade, a big, strong, burly, hard individual. And he was blubbering like a baby as he came down the aisle as fast as his little legs would carry him, because he was desperate to find God. God does it all the time. And this side of it happening, it's hard for us to expect it and to be patient with it and to trust in it, but it happens all the time. And so I would encourage you to keep praying, keep sharing, and keep looking for that moment. At some moment, you'll say something and God will turn it on in her mind.
I'm going to tell about my experience this morning and what I felt and saw.
Yeah.
And how wonderful that was.
Yeah.
And how big it was and all that. And
yeah. I was a new believer when my wife was facing some surgery that was significant surgery. She had a grapefruit-sized tumor and it had to be removed, and a lot of gynecological surgery had to take place. And it was, it probably wasn't life-threatening, but it was awfully scary to me. And it was the day before the surgery, and I was sitting at a big intersection in Orlando. Orlando is one of those places where you can have 6 lanes in each direction and have an intersection with another road that has 6 lanes in every direction. And when you get out in the middle of that, you better be paying attention to get yourself into the correct lane when you're coming, when you make the turn. In the middle of that intersection, God sat in the other front seat in that car and explained to me that he had tomorrow's surgery taken care of, and I didn't need to worry. And
well, I used to do that surgery. So some of the most wonderful moments is after the surgery is over and you go out and you speak with the husband. Because boy, they're a mess, right? Before you get there. And it's nice to have a good message. It's difficult when you don't.
Yeah.
Of course. But yeah, I mean, that's what life is.
God's
But-
there in it.
Yeah.
He's real. He's coming.
Yeah.
That's what this morning's all about. I think we lost everybody. We'll end that. Guys, who wants to pray?
Father, we come before you and our heart can be burdened for our brother, isn't it? Praise for his wife, their salvation. We have many like that in our families, Lord. Many. But God, you do all things right. Help us to be a living witness for you with our spouses, with our families. Give us strangers to cross our path. We may say a good word for you. Lord, we see ourselves as so small in comparison to our Creator. You spoke us into existence. Lord, nothing surprises you. You've known us before the foundation of the earth. These are truths, Lord, that are, you know, our inability to fully comprehend. And you take that into consideration because we're not you. We long for the day that we see you face to face. We thank you for Bob and his study, sharing his word. We've been blessed and we thank you for it. We pray for our pastor as he's seeking to get the